Thank you, everybody. Hi. This will be an interesting thing with the microphone. See if I have enough hands to do this here. So welcome to Steps to Health, the seminar on the Power of Optimism. I'm glad you all could come. It's a nice crowd. And I hope you enjoy this topic. The topic of optimism is interesting because it's not exactly what we typically think of when we think of optimism. And so I hope I bring you some surprises as it's associated with this topic, and I hope you really enjoy it. What Lynn was talking about, what I do for a living, I use this every day because I deal with clients and companies to develop programming that helps people make changes, and optimism is so central to making positive change. So this is something that I deal with my clients every single day, so I'm really passionate about it, and I know that it works. So I hope that you'll feel like you can leave here and be able to make some of these changes in your own life as well. You've got the handouts in front of you, and that's exactly what I'm going to go through, so you should be able to follow along with me. I'm just going to start at the beginning, and we're going to go through. I've got some handouts at the end that I'll draw your attention to at one point as well. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about several different things. I'm going to talk about where optimism came from, who kind of discovered it and developed it, why it's important. I'm going to talk about becoming more optimistic. That's kind of the most important part, how we can actually do this. And then typically I talk about ideas for wellness program, how people can use this in their companies too, because this is where I typically do this presentation. For today, we're going to skip that a little bit. It's mostly about you today. So the history of optimism, where it came from, it was discovered kind of in a roundabout way. It was discovered by way of learning about pessimism first, of course. So we learned about pessimism, and then we tried to kind of fix that. So the gentleman who discovered optimism was a doctor by the name of Martin Seligman. And he learned about optimism because he discovered something called learned helplessness. And learned helplessness is this idea that we can learn that nothing we do matters. So he discovered this in a lab with animals, unfortunately, but it was just this process where he discovered that animals, and therefore people, could learn that no matter how hard they tried, it didn't work, and that nothing they did mattered. And they kind of gave up. So it was this idea that this learned helplessness is just this idea that we give up in the face of adversary, okay? So what he discovered then with this learned helplessness is that it really had the same kind of symptoms in the lab as depression. And so he thought, well, how can we fix this? And who is most susceptible to learned helplessness? Why does it happen? And then what can we do about it? And what he found was that the people who are most susceptible to learned helplessness are pessimists. So that's interesting. And then from there, he, of course, tried to figure out how he could fix the problem. And what he realized is that teaching people to be more optimistic was kind of like a vaccine against pessimism, learned helplessness, and therefore depression. So if we can learn to be more optimistic, we can actually fend off depression and all the things that come along with it. So it was really fascinating. This all happened kind of in the 70s, and it really turned the field of psychology kind of on its head. It was very, very new and interesting, and it really paved the way for this whole idea of positive psychology and optimism. So it was really fascinating. So optimism, like I mentioned, is kind of a vaccine against depression, but it does so much more than that. So one of the slides, I have kind of a list of all of the great things that happen when you're an optimist and all of the things that kind of come along with pessimism. So if you can look at that with me, optimists resist helplessness. So helplessness, that idea that nothing we do matters, we give up in the face of adverse situations. Optimists resist that. So they don't give up. They keep trying in the face of negative situations. So we all want that, right? Okay, and then pessimists, of course, have the opposite. They're the ones that give up easier, okay? Optimists perform better. So this is at work and at play in all areas of life, and that's because they don't give up. Okay, that's part of that reason. They tap into the things that they can do to overcome adversity. They produce more, say in the workplace, and that's because they can work under pressure. They don't give up, okay? And then there's actually links to healthier life. Okay, so they live longer. In some studies, optimists lived longer, had more quality life. So that's really fascinating too. It's not just a mental thing, but it actually had some physical effects. The last thing I have on that list of optimism benefits is that they have better resiliency. Resiliency is a word that we use a lot in the wellness field, and it's just the idea that somebody bounces back quickly after something bad happens. So this idea that you can bounce back when there's something adverse in your way is a benefit of being optimistic. And of course, pessimists, unfortunately, don't have that quality. They're not as resilient because they kind of give up in the face of adversary, okay? So how can we do something about this? First of all, how do we even know whether we're optimistic or pessimistic? And then what can we do about it if we happen to have more pessimistic tendencies? Well, the first thing that we look at is explanatory style. So that's just the idea that we kind of go through life, and on the kind of edges of our mind, we're constantly explaining to ourselves, sometimes out loud, sometimes we're talking to other people, but most of the time it's in our own mind. We're explaining to ourselves what's going on in our life. We're talking to ourselves about what's happening, why did it happen, what was it, just our daily life. We've got kind of a monologue going all the time, okay? So it's just kind of unconscious, and this is our explanatory style, the way we describe the things that are happening in our lives. So explanatory style is essential to kind of understanding pessimism and optimism. And so you can kind of understand that if it's all in the way we explain things to ourselves, then it's something we can really control. It's our thought process. It all begins and ends right up here, and that's what we're going to talk about. How can we change the way that we think? So I've got a handout for you, and it makes it really easy to be able to see the different parts of optimism and pessimism. What I've got there is positive situations that occur and negative situations that occur and how we react to them, okay? And that is how I explain it to myself. My explanatory style when something negative happens or when something positive happens. So when something positive happens, say I get a bonus at work, okay? That's everybody's favorite thing. I get a bonus at work, that's definitely a positive situation, but I'm a pessimist. So I'm thinking, first permanence, I'm thinking it's not gonna last very long. Well, with a bonus at work, the way that translates is, this is a one-time thing. It's a one-time thing, it's, everybody got a bonus, it's just this one instance. I'm certainly not going to get a bonus again. It's certainly not going to be a permanent occurrence. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second is pervasiveness, and this is the idea that something, and this is a positive situation, something positive happens in my life. Does it affect a lot of areas of my life? Well, when I'm a pessimist, I think, no, this positive thing is isolated. It doesn't mean anything, it doesn't change anything, it doesn't affect any areas of my life. That's my pessimistic view. So when I'm thinking about a bonus, I'm thinking nothing good is going to come from this. It's just this isolated event. And then the third one, which is sometimes thought of as the most important, personalization. So with a bonus at work, I'm thinking everybody got a bonus. It's not because I did anything special. The company is doing well. Everybody got a bonus. It doesn't really mean anything about me. Okay, so I have completely unpersonalized it. It's nothing about me. It's because they were kind. The company's doing well. Everyone else got a bonus as well. So that one's really important. So if you think about that process, if this is my reaction when something good happens, how am I feeling afterwards? Certainly not good. I see a look like, yeah, that's exactly how you feel. Something good happens and I don't even feel good afterwards. So there's a direct connection between how I explain it to myself and how I feel afterwards. And I have the power to change that. So I can create the way that I feel after a situation. So let's move on. If something positive happens, and we'll just use that same example, I get a bonus at work, but I'm an optimist, it's a whole different ballgame for me, okay? So I'm thinking, first of all, that it will last a long time, or it will be recurring. I'm thinking, clearly they've seen the great thing that I am, and this is going to happen every year. I know it, and this is how I'm explaining it to myself. I'm thinking, this is the start of great things for me, okay? So it's permanent, or it will be recurring, it'll last a long time. Pervasiveness is the second one, and this is important here. This is the idea that this is going to affect more areas of my life. So in this particular situation, I'm thinking, this means that they've noticed something good in me, and that means that not only will I excel here at work, I can excel everywhere. It means that I'm a good communicator, or maybe I'm a good speaker, or maybe I can really efficiently get things done. Well, there's nothing saying that I can't be a good communicator in my relationships, or really efficiently get things done at home as well. So this means that I have good qualities that will affect all areas of my life. Okay, so I've made it a very pervasive thing. The last one then is personalization, and this one's really important because I am recognizing that if I got a bonus, it's because of something good I did. Yes, there's a piece of, the company's doing well, or they're really kind, or everybody else got bonuses too, but they didn't have to give me a bonus. If I'm not doing well, they certainly didn't have to, no matter how well they're doing. They did it because they recognized something good in me. So I recognize that, and that's a permanent quality that I'm thinking is positive in myself. And then you can imagine if this is my reaction to something positive that happens to me, what's my reaction? How am I feeling afterwards? I'm feeling energetic. I'm feeling pleased, happy, and I'm already thinking this is the start of great things, so I've got already some movement created, okay? So huge difference in the two types of reactions. We can look at things pessimistically, and optimistically about positive situations and negative situations. So we've talked about the positive. Let's look at the negative for a little bit. So if I've got a negative situation that happens, and I'm a pessimist, it's kind of the flip-flop of what we just talked about. Say I have a fight with a friend. Okay, it's my best friend. We've known each other, loved each other for years, but we get in a fight. So this is my negative situation, and I'm a pessimist. So I'm thinking, first, the permanence. I'm thinking, what does this mean? This means, clearly I'm bad at this whole thing. I'm bad at the whole friendship thing. Maybe I'll lose her friendship completely. Or maybe our friendship will be full of fights like this. Okay, so I'm thinking it's kind of a really recurring, permanent kind of thing. And I'm thinking, one thing that's really, it happens a lot with this permanence is this idea of always and never. Can't get much more permanent words than that. So I'm thinking this always happens. Or I can never, just have kind of a peaceful friendship. It always happens like this. These are the kinds of words that a pessimist uses, okay? The second thing then is that pervasiveness. So it will affect all areas of my life, or lots of areas. So I'm not just thinking about this friendship. I'm thinking about all my relationships. If I'm fighting with my best friend, what does this mean for my friends that I don't, like as much, or maybe they don't like me as much? What does it mean for that? Certainly not good. And then what about my spouse? What about my children? Clearly I'm bad at the whole relationship thing. I see bad things happening everywhere, okay? And then the third one, the personalization, is really important as well, because I'm blaming this whole thing on me. And not just on me, but on permanent negative qualities of mine. So I'm thinking not that I made a mistake, I'm thinking that I am actually bad at this. I'm thinking I'm bad at communicating. Or I didn't just say a careless thing, I'm an actual careless person. Can you see the difference? When we label ourselves with these really permanent negative qualities and we explain the things that are happening in our lives in that way, it's really profound. And then the feeling, of course, that I have afterwards is awful. I'm not feeling energetic and ready to make some changes in my relationships. I'm feeling like it's all over. I'm ready to give up, kind of learned helplessness. What's the point? Clearly I'm bad at this, okay? But if we can flip it and talk about the same situation if I'm an optimist, it's a whole different thing. So I have this negative situation. I have a fight with my friend, but I'm optimistic. So I'm thinking, it's not going to last that long. Okay, so I'm talking about the permanence here. She'll forgive me. She always does. Bless her heart. I say careless things, but I know we'll get through because we've gotten through in the past. So I'm bringing up evidence that proves we'll get through this. I'm not letting myself think about, we always have fights. We'll get through this. I know we will, because we've gotten through in the past, and she'll forgive me. I know it. Okay? And then I'm thinking of pervasiveness. So I'm not thinking about all the other relationships. I'm just thinking about this one. It's this one isolated event. It doesn't mean that all my relationships are going down the toilet. It's just this one event with my one friend, and between the two of us, we'll work it out. And I've even got evidence that shows, my other relationships are doing fine. And if I'm an optimist, I'm thinking about that kind of evidence too. I'm not letting my mind, prove me otherwise. I've got all this evidence that shows that, my friendships are doing fine. And this one friendship can be repaired just fine too. And then that third one, the personalization, which is of course really important, I am thinking, yes, this was a fight with my friend, and we know this kind of thing, it's always more than just my fault. Certainly there is some fault that lies on me. It's not just my friend's fault, but what is the reason? Is it because of a permanent negative quality in me, or did I just make a mistake? And if I just made a mistake, if I just said a careless word, was careless in that moment, well, I can do something about that. And for me, this happens all the time. I can be really careless sometimes, but it's the careless words that come out of me. It's not that I'm a careless person. And so when I'm an optimist, I'm thinking, I know I'm kind, I know I love her, but I said something careless. Well, certainly I can do something about that. Certainly I can make changes there. That's not permanent, that's just a mistake. So that's a huge difference between thinking that, what's the point because I'm a careless person, and all of a sudden I've got the energy to make some changes. So it's not this apathetic feeling, it's more of an energetic feeling, and I've already got some movement created. So the difference is just profound. Is that making sense to everybody? Can you see the flip sides of this and how you can feel such, two different ways because of those two thought processes? So I'm sure you can understand why our explanatory style matters. That's next slide there. The link between that explanatory style and how we feel afterwards is direct. We explain something to ourselves in a certain way, and we feel a certain way because of it. So two situations that were exactly the same, but two different explanatory styles, and the two people felt completely opposite. So it's directly related. The way we feel when we go through our life is directly related to that voice that's going on in our heads. Okay? So it's more than just communicating in our minds, though. It gets into our communication with others too. So if you've ever had that conversation, which I have a lot, where I'm talking to my spouse and he did something, of course he did something, and I'm saying, you always do this. He doesn't let me do that anymore. He knows all about this whole optimism thing, and he says, really? I always do that? He doesn't let me do the permanent thing. But it's really important when we're talking about these three different aspects, even in our communication with others, it's not just up in our minds. But most of our communication, our explanatory style, is on that tip of our consciousness. So when we start talking about changing the way that we think, it starts up there. And you can imagine as you go throughout your day, how many thoughts come and go, and we don't even realize that we had it. How often are you walking along, I stub my toe, and I think, oh, I'm so clumsy, and I just keep going. Well, I just called myself clumsy, which is a permanent negative quality. I heard it, felt it, kept going, didn't even recognize it, and if I do that too many times, it's not long before I believe that I'm clumsy. And that's just simple. That's just, a silly little thing. But can you imagine if we've got some really profound things like, wow, I'm a careless person, just floating around, and we're thinking it and believing it and moving on, and we don't even try to disprove that a lot of times. If we think it, we're thinking it's just incontrovertibly true. It's got to be true. I said it. Now, on the flip side, I don't know how many of you are married, but for me in my communication with my spouse, if my husband tried to tell me I was a careless person, I would have a list a mile long of why he's wrong. Immediately. That's the first place my mind goes. I'm defending myself like, I'm not careless, and here's why, But if I say it, I believe it immediately, and I don't even come up with any evidence to prove myself wrong. Well, that's not the way it should be, and if we're wanting to try to change our thoughts, the first thing we do is recognize the thought, and the second thing we do is come up with some evidence to prove it wrong. So we come up with the evidence that we need to have this more optimistic thought. And it's not that we're thinking unrealistic things like nothing's my fault, but we're thinking realistic, as realistically as reality will allow, as optimistically as reality will allow, okay? So, that process, noticing them, evaluating them for accuracy, generating a more positive thought, is the way that we kind of change those thoughts and become more optimistic. So I've got kind of a little case study. Maybe you can tell in your notes there, it's example of a pessimistic explanatory style, and we're just going to look at that. We're going to look at that, and it's kind of a tool to help you see how the way that we explain things to ourselves determines how we feel afterwards. So I've just got this really simple little case study. I've got a gentleman, and his boss criticizes him, and he thinks something, I've got a blank there, and he feels depressed all day. Now, I don't know how much you all feel like chatting and helping me out here, but can anybody tell me what he might have thought after his boss criticized him that would make him feel depressed all day? Anybody? Yeah, he might think he's a failure, absolutely. That would make me feel depressed all day, and that's, would come right to mind after your boss criticizes you. Anything else? Yeah. Absolutely, that his boss doesn't like him. Absolutely. And these are both permanent things and really easy to think those things after your boss criticizes you, right? So this is permanent. It's not changeable, these things that were generated. And so he's feeling kind of this dejected, passive. He might even sit at his desk and mope for, the whole day. He's certainly not feeling the energy to change, right? So let's flip that. We've got the same thing. His boss criticizes him. He thinks something, but he feels pretty good about it. When I type this up, I think, what in the world could he have thought? Okay, it doesn't seem real natural, but can anybody think of something he might have thought that made it so that he felt pretty good about what happened? Yeah, it's all about his way of doing it. Absolutely. He cares about me and he wants to help me improve. Anything else? Absolutely. Just giving that person who gave you the criticism the benefit of the doubt. Right, and some of that's personalization. Maybe this isn't all about me. Maybe you've got something else going on. So I loved the ideas that you guys generated because the things that you said were, first of all, not necessarily completely personal, not all my fault. If they were my fault, maybe I really did make a mistake. Maybe I really did blow it, but I can make some changes. Maybe my boss has given me some tips on how I can do that. So these are things that already the wheels are turning. I'm thinking, what can I do about this? How can I make it different next time? What can I do to maybe impress my boss or maybe just be better at my job? Because of this situation, I'm already energized and there's already movement. I'm already heading towards the positive. So can you see the two differences? Wouldn't it be amazing if we could all react to criticism this way? Already I'm thinking of what I can do to make it better. That's pretty fascinating, isn't it? And it's all about the way he explained that situation to himself in his own mind. So that's pretty fascinating. So I got a handout there. It's the one that's actually stapled to your PowerPoint presentation. And it's a really simple handout that kind of explains this kind of situation. Adversity happens. What's my belief about that situation, and then what's the consequence? So it's kind of that same ABC that we just were talking about, but it's a place there for you to actually do this on your own. So maybe something happened recently, and you can kind of analyze it. You can talk about, what was the adverse, situation? What was my belief about it? How did I explain it to myself? And then what was the consequence? How did I feel afterwards? And when we can define those things, that's when we can go back and think, okay, how could I have explained this to myself so that I felt differently afterwards? And that's where the change happens. So that handout is yours to keep, obviously, and I hope that you'll use it and try to kind of analyze the way that you explain things to yourselves. One thing that I want to bring to light for just a second is that when you look at pessimism and optimism, the way I've got it lined up, we've got, the 3 Ps, and a pessimist explains it this way. it won't always be exactly like that. We might have one area that we lean a little pessimist. So for me, it's the permanence. I'm always saying things, well, I just did it. I'm always saying things like always. I'm explain things that way often. And it's something that I need to work on, but the other two, not as much. I'm good at blaming things on other people, and I think they're isolated, and that's no big deal. But for the permanence, I have to focus on that. So when situations happen to me, it's not that I've got all three red flags. I might just have one. And it might depend on whether it's a positive situation or a negative situation. So when you're looking at that, there's just maybe even one area that you could work on. And so it's not all three. And so keep that in mind when you're looking at that. And that's why that tool is so handy, when you can look at individual situations and see how you explained it to yourself. So I just want to bring you back, just before I'm done here, remembering the connection between the way we explain things to ourselves and the way we feel afterwards. That's in your power to control. So we can't always control the situations that we are in. We are going to have negative things happen to us. We are going to have positive things happen to us. But the way we explain them to ourselves, that we can control. Something we can control. That's fantastic. But that power is with you. You actually have that power. So we're not just at the mercy of everything that happens to us. And I want you to keep that in mind, and I hope that with the tools that I've given you today, you can create the kind of feelings as you go through life that you want. And if you see a situation where afterwards you're feeling, pretty awful, you can go back and figure out why, and figure out what you can do about it and make some changes. I really appreciate you all coming out. Thank you so much. And if you have questions, my information is there.